In a small town tucked away in a beautiful valley, Eliza lived with her father, Samuel. Their home wasn't much, but it had been theirs for generations. The farm that surrounded their house had always been a source of pride for the family, a place where they grew their food and lived peacefully. But that peace was being taken away, slowly but surely. The land, once rich and fertile, was no longer able to provide what it once had. Years of drought had drained the soil of its strength, and the crops were failing. Eliza's father was getting older, and his health was no longer what it used to be. The man who had spent most of his life working on the farm, waking up early to tend to the animals and fields, was now too weak to do all of it on his own. Eliza, at only 22 years old, had stepped in to help as much as she could. But there was only so much she could do. The debts that had been piling up for months now threatened to take away everything they had worked for, and there was no way to stop it. The bank had given them one last chance to pay what they owed. If they failed to do so, their house and farm would be taken away, and they would have nowhere to go. The morning the final notice arrived, Eliza felt a cold weight in her chest. The letter from the bank was clear. If they didn't pay the full amount by the end of the week, everything would be taken from them. The thought of losing their home, the place where her father had raised her and where she had spent her whole life, was unbearable. She couldn't imagine what would become of them. The whole town knew the Hale family. Victor Hale, the wealthy rancher who owned nearly all the land around theirs, was a man of great influence. He had made a fortune in cattle farming, and now his vast ranch stretched for miles, with herds of cattle roaming the land. He was known to be tough, unyielding, and almost impossible to deal with. People in town spoke of him with a mix of respect and fear. He was the kind of man who got what he wanted, no matter the cost, for Eliza. Asking Victor for help was not something she had ever imagined she would do. But as the days passed and the weight of the situation became heavier, she realized she had no choice. If she didn't act quickly, her father and she would be left homeless. She thought about the rancher's land and wealth. Maybe he could offer a loan, or perhaps there was some way he could help. The thought of turning to him filled her with dread, but it was the only option left. Eliza made up her mind. She knew that time was running out, and so, one fateful afternoon, she set out for Victor Hale's mansion. Her heart pounded in her chest as she walked the long, dusty road leading to his estate. The grand house sat at the top of a hill, towering over everything else in the area. Its tall walls and ornate gates were a sharp contrast to her family's humble home. As Eliza approached, she could see the vast grounds, the neatly trimmed hedges, and the luxurious stables where the horses were kept. The wealth and power of Victor Hale were clear in every corner of his estate. When she reached the front door, she hesitated for a moment, feeling small and out of place. She had never been inside a house like this before, but she pushed her nerves aside and knocked firmly. A servant answered and led her into a large sitting room, where Victor Hale was sitting by a fireplace, his sharp gaze already studying her as she entered. Victor was a tall man, with dark hair and a face that was both handsome and intimidating. His eyes were cold, as though he saw the world through a lens of business and power. Eliza felt her heart race even faster as she stood before him. She had prepared herself for this moment, but now that she was here, the words seemed to escape her. I've come to ask for your help, Eliza finally managed to say, her voice trembling just slightly. My father and we're in danger of losing our home. The bank is going to take everything if we can't pay the debt. Please, Mr. Hale, is there any way you could help us? Victor studied her for a moment. His expression was unreadable. Eliza felt the silence stretch on, each second making her feel more exposed and vulnerable. You want me to help you? He asked, his voice low and calculating. And why should I do that? Eliza took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. She didn't want to beg, but at that moment, it felt like the only thing left to do. My father worked hard his whole life for this land. We don't have much, but it's all we have. I'm not asking for charity. I just need a little time, maybe a loan, or something to keep us afloat, please. I'll do anything, she said, her eyes welling with tears. Victor's gaze didn't soften. Instead, he leaned back in his chair. His fingers steepled in front of him as he considered her words. Eliza had no idea what he was thinking, but the tension in the room was unbearable. She had no idea how to get through to him. Then, just when she thought she might break down, Victor spoke again, his tone cold and blunt. "You want my help?" he said. "Then you must be my wife." Eliza froze. The words hit her like a blow. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. Her mind raced as she tried to process the offer. Was he serious? How could he ask something like that? She had come here in desperation, not expecting anything like this. Her hand shook as she tried to understand his words. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. Victor's eyes met hers, his expression unwavering. "You heard me. Marry me, and I'll make sure you don't lose your farm. I'll take care of your debts, and your home will be safe." The room seemed to spin around Eliza. She had come here to beg for help, but this was not what she had imagined. The idea of marrying a man she barely knew, someone so powerful and cold, was unimaginable. Yet, looking at Victor's stern face, she knew he wasn't offering this out of kindness. It was a deal, a business transaction. He wanted something in return for his help. Eliza's heart sank. She didn't want to make this choice, but there seemed to be no other way. She looked at Victor, her mind racing for an answer, for a way out. But there was none. If she said no, everything they had would be gone. With a heavy heart, she spoke. "And if I say yes?" Victor's lips curled into a thin smile. "Then your home will be safe. You'll no longer have to worry about losing everything." Eliza closed her eyes for a moment, trying to gather her thoughts. She had never imagined her life would lead her to this point, but she knew that in order to save her family, she had no choice but to accept his proposal. It was a decision that would change everything, but it was the only way to keep her home. "I'll marry you," Eliza said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. Victor stood up slowly, his expression unreadable. "Good. Then the arrangements will be made." As Eliza left his mansion that day, her mind was in turmoil. She had agreed to something she never thought she would. She was about to marry a man she barely knew, but she had no choice. Her family's future depended on it. After the strange agreement between Eliza and Victor was made, her life took a sharp turn. It felt like a dream, a heavy, surreal dream she couldn't wake from. Eliza had no choice but to accept Victor's proposal. The weight of her decision sat heavy in her chest, but the thought of losing her home, her father's land, was unbearable. She had never imagined that she would marry a man like Victor Hale, yet here she was, preparing for a future with a stranger who seemed as cold and calculating as the vast estate he owned. The wedding was arranged quickly. Eliza didn't have time to process all of it. She had never thought of marriage before, much less marrying a man she had barely spoken to. The ceremony was small but grand. The rich, expensive decorations contrasted sharply with the simplicity of her own life. Eliza had never worn anything as elegant as the white dress she was given, and when she walked down the aisle, it felt as if she was walking into a new world, a world she didn't understand. Victor, as usual, remained distant throughout the event. His face was as hard and unreadable as ever. He didn't seem happy, but then again, she didn't expect him to be. She had agreed to marry him out of necessity, not love. And she knew that he had likely done the same, marrying her, not out of affection, but because it served his purpose. The moment they were married, Eliza's life shifted completely. Her once familiar home and daily routines were replaced with the grandeur of Victor's mansion and ranch. Gone were the simple days of helping her father on the farm. Now, she found herself in a world of wealth and power that was both overwhelming and isolating. At first, Victor barely spoke to her. They lived under the same roof but in separate worlds. Eliza had her own suite in the mansion, with beautiful views of the sprawling ranch outside. The house was vast, almost too large for one person, let alone a couple who barely knew each other. It felt empty, and no matter how much she tried to settle into it, it never felt like home. She spent her days alone, wandering the halls of the mansion, trying to find her place. She wasn't used to the luxury that surrounded her. Everything in the house seemed so perfect and polished. Yet Eliza couldn't shake the feeling of loneliness. The maids and servants would smile politely but say little, and Victor was always away, tending to his ranching business. They spoke only when necessary, and even then, the conversations were brief and impersonal. But as the weeks went by, Eliza noticed something subtle. Victor wasn't as cold as he appeared. There were moments, small, fleeting moments, when he would soften. She would catch him looking out the window, his eyes distant, and for a brief second, he would seem human. There was pain in his eyes, something hidden beneath the surface. Eliza wondered about his past, about the things that made him so distant and guarded. She knew that behind the hard exterior, there was a man who had suffered. But she didn't know how to reach him. One day, while Eliza was walking along the edge of the ranch, she noticed Victor standing by the stables, inspecting the horses. The sun was setting, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink, and there was a calmness in the air that seemed to draw her to him. She hesitated for a moment, but then, feeling a sudden urge to speak to him, she approached. Victor turned as he heard her footsteps, his expression unchanged. But this time, Eliza didn't shrink back. She had been living in his world for weeks now, and something had changed inside her. She wasn't the scared, unsure girl who had come to him for help anymore. She was starting to find her own strength. "I was thinking," she said quietly, "maybe I could help with the ranch. I don't know much about cattle or land management, but I can learn. It might help us both." Victor raised an eyebrow, clearly surprised by her offer. "You want to help me with the ranch?" he asked, his tone almost amused. Eliza nodded, looking out at the fields stretching before them. "I've been on a farm my whole life. I might not know your way of doing things, but I've worked with animals and crops before. I could help." For a moment, Victor didn't respond. Then, he sighed, as if he had been expecting this moment. "All right," he said, his voice softer than before. "I'll show you around tomorrow. But don't expect things to be easy." The next day, Eliza found herself at the heart of Victor's world. She had always worked hard, but this was a different kind of work. The ranch was enormous, and there was always something to do. Cattle to manage, horses to train, and fields to tend to. The work was physically demanding, but Eliza found herself enjoying it. There was something about the simplicity of the tasks that brought her peace. For the first time since she arrived at the mansion, she felt like she was contributing, like she was part of something real. Victor watched her from a distance, and though he didn't say much, Eliza noticed the subtle approval in his eyes. At first, he had doubted her abilities, but slowly, she proved him wrong. She learned quickly, asking questions when needed, and working tirelessly to keep up with the demands of the ranch. Over time, she became more confident, and in a strange way, she started to feel like she belonged. One evening, after a long day's work, Eliza and Victor found themselves sitting on the porch of the house, watching the sunset. The sky was quiet, and the sounds of the ranch had died down for the night. Victor, for the first time in weeks, spoke to her without the coldness that usually surrounded him. "You've done well," he said, his voice gruff but genuine. "I didn't think you would last." Eliza smiled, feeling a sense of pride. "I told you I could learn. I wasn't going to sit around all day." Victor looked at her, his expression softening. "I didn't expect you to care so much about this place. Most people would have given up by now." Eliza turned her head toward him. "This place matters to me now. It's not just your ranch anymore. It's ours, and I want to make it better." Victor nodded, his gaze turning thoughtful. "I don't trust people easily," he said quietly. "I've been hurt before, but you're different. You don't give up easily." Eliza felt a small warmth in her chest. For the first time since their marriage, she felt like they were connecting in a way that wasn't just about business or necessity. Maybe, just maybe, there was something more between them than she had thought. As the days passed, Eliza and Victor continued to work together on the ranch. The more they worked, the more they began to understand each other. Eliza, with her kind heart and unwavering spirit, began to break down the walls Victor had built around himself. And Victor, with his quiet strength and deep knowledge of the land, started to show Eliza that there was more to life than survival. The marriage that had begun as a mere business arrangement was slowly changing. It was still uncertain whether love would ever grow between them, but a bond was starting to form, a bond built on respect, trust, and shared experiences. As Eliza stood next to Victor on the porch that evening, she felt a flicker of hope. Maybe, just maybe, this new life could become something beautiful after all.